I'm here with Denise Castro on the Truth and Justice League podcast, and Denise is going to talk to me about some stories that are from my earlier career as a lawyer. Denise, what do you want to know?
I would like to know about your very first case.
That's a good one to start with. The first case, the first real case I had, was a criminal case, and me and my law partner at the time, Dennis Powell, were court appointed by the judge to represent a client that didn't have the funds to hire a lawyer. So it was in 1982. We had just completed the law school, and both of us had gotten the bar exam passed, and we were ready to go. And we got appointed to this case in Orange, Texas, which for viewers that are not from here, that is deep southeast Texas on the border of Louisiana. And at the time, included in Orange County, which is where the trial was a city named Bider, which was the headquarters of the Ku Klux Klan in Texas.
What was the name of the city?
Bider.
Bider?
Vidor. Bider, Texas.
Oh, okay.
So it's relevant because of the kind of case it was. So what we had was a young African-American man, like 18 years old, who was in a party that got raided by the police. And as a result of that, he was charged with aggravated assault on a police officer in Orange, Texas. And so he was charged. That's a felony. And it only requires that the person make unconsented touching with a police officer. So you don't have to hurt anybody. You just have to prove that they just have to prove that you touched a cop without his permission. And you can get up to 99 years in prison.
Wait.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that. So if you simply touch a cop
Without their permission.
you can be in jail for 99 years.
Correct. And so that's the charge. He was charged with aggravated assault on a police officer. That's what it was alleged to be. Okay. And this is our going to be our first real trial, right? So there's negotiations that go on between you and the district attorney, and they offered him 6 years in prison. This guy had no criminal record.
Yeah.
And he said no. He said he was innocent, never did this stuff. And so we proceeded to go to trial. So, I was thinking this was going to be, well, it's a very intense case, obviously, right? Big stakes. But, I've watched a lot of TV shows about lawyers. So, wow, I'm going to go in my head. I'm going to go in there and just, be razzle and dazzle and get him off and, walk away, not guilty, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So that was what we were thinking as the case was getting ready to, go lead up to trial. We were feeling like we got this. And then about 2 days before we were starting the trial, it started hitting me real hard. I went, oh my God, this guy could go to prison for like life. Or, if he doesn't get life, he will get 30 years, in this trial. What do I do?
And it was your first case.
My first case. So we have to go select a jury, right? And so, down there first, and then figure out how to do the case. But selecting the jury was the first big thing. So I finally, I panicked. And I called this friend of mine who was the sister of one of my law school classmates. Kathy Bennett was her name, was the sister. And she was actually a real jury consultant at the time and pretty well known. And of course, I couldn't afford to hire a jury consultant or any of this kind of stuff, go down there and do this. But I called her. She picked up the phone. This is before we had cell phones and stuff. She actually picked up her home phone at night. And we talked about it. I said, help, essentially. Hey, what do I do?
Yeah.
Okay. And she goes, okay. Okay, you can get through this. Calm down. And basically, this is your first trial, so make use of it. That's your first trial. Be honest with the jury. Tell them it's your first trial, and you're worried about the case, and you want their help making sure that justice gets done. And she said, and just remember, you're like, at this point I was in my 20s. She said, you have that young kind of, you look like a Boy Scout, you know, you're young, look young for your age. Use that. You look like you wouldn't, you look like what we would call an affidavit face at the time. Probably don't look like that anymore, but you'd make use of that, you know, go in there and then just talk about what you're afraid of and the parts of the case that you're concerned about. And so I went rolling in to do this, right? Now, I felt a little relieved when she said that, but still I got to go to court. So I go rolling into court in Orange, Texas with my law partner, Dennis Powell. Both of us just graduated from law school. Okay. Dennis is from around that area, but I'm certainly not. I'm originally from Wisconsin. So I'm a Yankee and I'm in the heart of what we would call the Texas good old boy country, right? Right there. So, there we go. We get the jury. So the way this works for people who haven't seen it is a big group of potential jury members are led into the courtroom and they fill up the court. We had asked for extra people because we knew that there was going to be, we felt like we were going to go through a lot of jurors that could not be fair in this particular case because it was involving a cop, black and white, you know, criminal versus the police, also a kid from Louisiana, if that makes any difference. That wasn't the biggest thing we were worried about. But so we had like, I think 48 potential jurors that were there. And so I started with basically, you know, telling them who I was. There I was, basically. Also, I got to tell you, I was broke. I was new. I was a Yankee. And I was wearing like, I think a $6 used suit that I got from Goodwill or one of the Salvation Army or one of those places, right? And so, I mean, all the clothes I had on my back, maybe $20, okay, everything. And I think I might have had one backup, you know, in case this went on real long, but I was there I was. So I go to the jury. I didn't tell the jury I was wearing a $6 suit, but, you know, I went to talk to the jury and I said, you know, this is my first trial. And I am very concerned that my client will not have as good a chance as if he had a more experienced lawyers in this case. And that's not fair to him. And so I want to talk to you about some, feelings that you might have as jurors and try to figure out how we get to actually a juror that will give my client and the state of Texas a fair shake. So, I asked the jury basically if they could take into account this is my first trial, you know, and to try not to hold that against me, if anything, to kind of give us a little bit of extra slack for things I might say that might be not exactly informed, but I don't know it. And so, that was kind of an icebreaker. You know, people could acknowledge that, they also, could get nervous or intimidated the first time doing something really important, especially like this, It's a big deal.
I mean, the guy's facing almost 99
99
years.
years, right? This is when you think back about this is crazy. So,
yes.
So then I talked to him about the elephants in the room. Okay, that we were dealing with an issue. First thing I think I talked about, well, other than me talking about being young and inexperienced and not how that's going to work, I went to the idea of a cop versus a alleged criminal, and we rely on the police to take care of us, to do a good job, to tell the truth, and they got the blue uniforms and the badges, and so a lot of people just say, well, police arrested him, must be guilty, must be something there, right? And so we talked about that. So I asked people basically, does a police officer get more credibility in court than to somebody who is charged with but not proven guilty of a crime? And we got to, people had a little bit of difficulty about understanding, the trial system, but they basically, when they were informed, they came around to the idea, yeah, we are presumed to be innocent, okay? But, people don't, they might say they understand that, but they're like, yeah, that guy's here, he's going to be guilty,
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Did you come up with that question on your own, or did you get help from your friend's sister?
She told me to talk about the police stuff, obviously, and it was a big topic there,
Yeah.
right? And so I did. I mean, she didn't give me the exact words to say or anything. I just kind of had to shoot from. She said, just say what comes up for you when you're doing it.
So you just winged it.
I just more or less winged it. I mean, I thought things through a little bit,
Yeah.
but then I ultimately I just I just winged it. And so I asked people whether or not they had ever heard of or seen situations where maybe the police exaggerated something, and so, for example, people pulled over for a speeding ticket, but they really weren't speeding, or those kinds of things. Now sometimes they are, but I got a few people to say, I had a situation one time where blah blah blah, the cop didn't listen to me, or I didn't think that his version or her, that time it was mostly men, was what really happened. So we started a little bit of it, but just a little teeny bit, and so got them to say that agree that it wouldn't be fair to take the word of the police officer just on its own over the word of a citizen just on their own. That you have to listen to the cross-examination of both parties and listen to what's going on, and then make your overall decision at the end of the case, who's telling the truth, okay? And are there shades of gray in it? So, kind of got past that the best we could. And then I took on the big one, which was, as part of this, I told the jury in the beginning that, I'm not from around here, okay? I grew up in Wisconsin, and they could tell by my accent I wasn't from Southeast Texas. And that, I said, I remember when I was in law school driving by on the freeway and seeing basically this fire up in the woods to the left where I was driving. And I asked my law school friend, I'm trying the case with now, what's that? And he goes, oh, that's a cross burning. And I'm like, well, that's a new one on me, right? To give you background, Vidor, Texas, which is was in that county, used to have a sign that said, "Don't let the sun set on your black ass in Vidor." Seriously,
Like around what year was this?
This was in the 70s to 80s in time frame. So this was right. I don't know if it was still there when we were there, okay, but it was just before that, not too long before that. So there were no black people that lived in Vidor. There were some black people that lived in Orange, Texas, and of course, some of the other counties there were, but not in Vidor. There weren't until later. They integrated that city with a big dramatic deal, right? So the first people that got rented to that were black or were able to buy houses in Vidor was a big thing on TV, massive. So it's a real deal. So anyway, we talked about that, and then I said, had people heard that this was an area where there was Ku Klux Klan, and that it was actually a local headquarters of the Ku Klux Klan, okay? And I don't know how many of these people are actually in the Klan, I mean, hopefully they're not, but it's like kind of a big elephant in the room. It's not a big secret, right? That was going on there. And it was just kind of the way things were at that time. And I'm not saying all these people were bad. Certainly, there were people that were worse than others, but part of this was just the culture people grew up in. And anyway, people were aware of this. And I said, I think the big elephant in the room here is, how does my client get a fair trial in Orange County, where there are these, where there have been historically and still probably are racial attitudes that are not favorable to my client. And so put that out there. And, ask some people questions about how they feel about that, and, how they feel about racial. And most people, well, the racial stuff maybe it used to be a problem, but, we're past that now. We're not really, that way now, right? We're in the modern era. So I could see that we were going to get people kind of like not really fessing up to the basic problem that we were dealing with, okay?
Yeah.
So I just did this. I don't know what possessed me to say it like this, but I said, now there's a warning here because this is not correct language to use, but I'm telling you exactly what I said, which is in the transcript, I said, how many people here of you jurors can honestly say you've never used the word? Raise your hands. Okay. And so maybe 3-4 people raise their hands. Okay. The way I said it, on 3 or 4 people raise their hands. Okay. So now I've got, most of the jury, the very bulk of the jury that has basically admitted that they've used the word before, right? So then the next question I asked was to the jurors of those people who have, okay, I'm getting a show of hands of the people that have used the word. You, sir, when did you use that word and who were you talking to? Mm-hmm. And I don't remember the exact language of this, but it was somewhat like this. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but that was I was talking to Tommy down at the shop, and he just kind of, that's how we talked. He kind of liked. He was okay with it. That didn't sound so good. That this is just how they talked, and he was okay with it, right? And so I said to him, well, do you see how that might be something where my client would be a little bit uncomfortable with that kind of language about him when he's black, you're white, and this case is going to trial in Orange, Texas against a cop. And so the guy, look, I didn't mean anything by it, but I can see what you mean, essentially, basically, And so I said, well, do you think in all fairness that it would be better if you just weren't on this jury because of the appearance that this might give, that you might not be completely impartial? And he said he would. So he basically took himself off, okay, of the jury. And so then I went down basically row by row, okay. What was your, basically, why did you use that word? Who were you talking to? What did you mean by it? All this kind of stuff. And the same kind of scenario played out because there's not really a good way to answer that question.
Right.
Okay. And so what we ended up having was, and I said, look, if you don't really feel comfortable saying the whole thing in front of the whole group, you can come up in front of the judge and we can do it in front of the judge and the court reporter.
Yeah, I was thinking the same, like
So,
that being called out in a group.
Yeah.
Like
So we started doing that, right?
Yeah.
So we have it in front of the judge with the court reporter, taking it down and asked a bunch of questions on this. And so that was more favorable. So I gave them the option, right? I wasn't being a total jerk, but they also did not want to get called out in front of the group or in front of the judge. Mm-hmm. So you could tell people's sensibilities were being challenged and they didn't want to be embarrassed. And this was an embarrassing thing and they didn't know when it was going to end. And so, basically the tactic was the same kind of thing where we get people to acknowledge that this at least has the appearance of being unfair, okay, and that there should be no elements of that kind of thing at all in the jury that we finally selected because the defendants had enough on their plate to deal with. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the approach, okay? And a lot of the jurors took themselves off with the help of me and the judge. They just started taking themselves off. We must have lost at least half the juror.
Out of how many?
48. I mean, there must have been.
Wow, that's a big group.
There were dozens of, at least 2 dozen, maybe more, that basically took themselves off the jury.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that was pretty good. And so then I also said, the prosecutor is going to take off every black person that they can. So just be aware of that. They're going to try to do that, even though they're not supposed to. And of course, the prosecutor's like, we wouldn't do that. Of course, then they do it. But they were called out. So there was one potential juror that was black that they didn't strike. And, the other ones, they tried to make up excuses for why they took them off and et cetera, but it was always race. It was a color thing. And so, then we're talking this was me doing this. So, I said, well, let's do a little, now that we have as many people off as we possibly can. I said, well, we don't have any control over what's going to happen back when you're in the jury box. So you're going to have to, basically judge yourselves back there. And if it starts getting out of control, where people are bringing up inappropriate content, you need to tell them that. If they don't straighten it out, call the bailiff and we'll get the judge involved. so that was one tool that we put in there. But before that, I had the jury go, basically, these are mostly white people, right? So I said, let's look at this from this way. Imagine that you, the white jurors, were actually charged with a crime. And one of you was, okay? And you walked into the courtroom and your defense lawyers were black, the prosecutors were black, the judge was black, the bailiff was black, the court reporter is black, everyone is black but you. Kind of like this case reversed, right? Would you feel the slightest bit uncomfortable that you wouldn't be properly understood? That they just wouldn't have the background to understand where you're coming from. Or they might have some issue because they've been treated badly by those black people that are there that prosecuting and defending you may have been treated badly by a white person or been told by their parents, don't trust white people. Okay. So putting them in that role, I had them actually, role reverse in that situation and try to appreciate what it would be like to be in that situation. So we did that exercise. And then at the very end, I asked them if they would, be very diligent to set aside any aspect of the prejudice stuff when they were back there, because we talked about it, right? Mm-hmm. And what I said about keeping it clear with the group, and then if they didn't, to call in the bailiff and the judge. So there we go. Then we start the trial, and it was I did opening statement. My law partner at the time, Dennis Powell, who later was a judge, he did closing argument, and we took turns cross-examining people and putting people on direct exam. Called my client, called a friend of his. There were a couple cops that testified, and I cross-examined one of the cops. I can't remember. Maybe it was Dennis that cross-examined the other cop. But basically, what I drew out of the cop was that the situation didn't exactly match what he had described, okay, in the police report, but it was like it took a while to get there, okay? So my client actually was trying to run away and hide. I think it kind of made the cop mad that he had to chase this guy, because they raided a party and everybody's scattering and they're like hiding under beds and closets and running out the back porch and whatever. So my guy gets hauled out from underneath the bed, essentially, by the cop, okay? And that's when the cop said that he assaulted. First, he tried to evade. So he said evading is, tried to get away. And then they said he took basically resisted and then, assaulted the cop.
Like resisted or assaulted the cop while the cop is pulling him out from underneath the bed?
I don't remember. That was one of my points.
Yeah,
was like
that doesn't
when
make
exactly?
sense. Come on, cop, what happened?
When exactly did that happen?
Yeah.
Right. So that was the point, right?
Yeah.
So, but the cop was saying no. When he got up, he was like, he was aggressive and he struck me and all this stuff, right? So I got into, do you have any bruises? Did you take any pictures? Blah blah blah, that kind of thing. So anyway, that was the basic hit. And Dennis gave a great closing argument on, conflicting evidence and things like that. We closed up the argument. We went across the street while the jury was deliberating to our little office that we had at the time. And we were like, okay, wow, that was our first trial. And then I wonder how long the jury will be out. Okay, so normally with a criminal case, the longer the jury stays out, the better it is for the defendant. Okay, like they're hung up on some issue or they're giving him the benefit of the reasonable doubt, So the longer it is, the more there's likely that everybody's not just agreed to convict. We were always told if they come back fast, they just have no doubt they're going to hammer you. So we get across the street. We're just getting a cup of coffee. And the phone rings. And our secretary answered the phone. She goes, it's the court. They have a verdict. Oh, my God. Utter extreme panic hit all of us. We were like, oh, my God, what the heck did we just do?
Like how long after?
8 minutes.
Oh, Lord.
Okay, literally 8 minutes, right? They're never supposed to come back that soon, right?
Yeah.
And so we were talking, Dennis and I were talking, like, what do we do now? Because this was just the guilty, not guilty part. After that, we were going to have to go to the jury for punishment. So if the jury doesn't believe us, okay, we're now going to have to go to them and go to them for punishment when they already don't believe us.
Right.
Not so good. I mean, we were like, well, we don't have any witnesses even lined up, right? Like at that point, we should probably have like his mother who didn't want to come across the border from Louisiana because she was afraid something would happen to her. But we didn't really have a lot of people except for the client to testify that why he shouldn't get the time, right? So we're walking across the street going, well, basically, what do we do? We go in, and it was the judge, just like you've seen on TV, kind of like judge goes all, do you have all rise, on my side, all rise. Jury, do you have a verdict? And they said, we do, Your Honor. Go through the process. The judge inspects the, verdict sheet, and then eventually it is read to the jury, right? It's not read to the jury, it's read to us. So I'm standing there, Dennis standing there, client standing there, like you're on a firing squad or something like this, and they're going to kill all of us, right? And slowly, okay, they go, we, the jury, for the count of blah, 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 aggravated assault on a police officer, find the defendant, and we're like, hearts are beating, we're like going crazy, like, oh, what did I do? Not guilty.
My goodness.
Okay, so that was
stressful.
That was my first trial, and my client turned to me and goes, "What do I do now?" And I said, "You get across the state line as fast as you can, but do not violate any traffic laws."
Yeah.
And just you go back home and you thank God you're off and don't come back here. And so that was the story. And it turned out it was the fastest not guilty verdict in Orange County history.
Wow.
And we thought, we're never going to lose a trial. We're so good. We're never going to lose. And I can tell you that lasted maybe another trial or two.
Yeah.
And of course the inevitable happens. You get dinged. So I wasn't the first undefeated lawyer in history. But that's the story, Ms. Castro.
That's
Denise.
very impressive.
All right.
For being your first.
We were very lucky. It was, I think, some beginner's luck, and following the advice of Kat Bennett to just be, straight up with the jury, and good cross-examination of the cop. Really did a very careful job with the police officer. And then I will tell you how much time left, Ariel? Okay, we have 1 minute. And this is probably something you may want to blip out. Is that a number of years later, we were in Beaumont, Texas, me, a bunch of reporter friends of mine, a woman I was dating at the time that worked for the news station, a bunch of reporters. We're out dancing in a club. And it turned out the best dancing clubs in there weren't many. The best one was a predominantly gay club. We're there doing our thing. And guess who we see? The cop.
Oh.
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 Okay.
Okay. Anyway, thank you, Miss Castro. We
Thanks
can
for
decide
having-
whether to leave that in or not. Bye.
Okay, bye. That was good. I don't remember that part. The cop being at the club.
I think it was with a black guy.
Whoa.